Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, a king and queen had a beautiful baby girl. They arranged a feast and invited many guests to celebrate the baby's arrival. The queen said, "I will invite the fairies too, so they will be kind to our little daughter." So they invited 12 fairies, but they didn't ask the 13th fairy because she was so mean. After the feast, the fairies stood around the baby princess's cradle. Each fairy waved her wand and gave a special gift to the princess, such as goodness, kindness, and happiness. Suddenly, just before the last fairy was about to give her gift, the door burst open. It was the 13th fairy. She was angry because she hadn't been invited, and she went up to the baby and said, "When the princess is 15, she will prick her finger on a spindle and die." The king and queen were very upset when they heard this, and the mean fairy flew off. But everyone had forgotten that the last fairy had still to give her her gift. She stepped forward and said, "I cannot take away the bad wish, but I can change it." So the last fairy said that when the princess pricked her finger, she would not die, but would instead fall asleep for 100 years. All the people in the palace would fall asleep too. So when the princess woke up, her family and friends would all be there too. The princess grew up to be good, kind, and happy, all of the things that the fairies had said she would be. But on the day of her 15th birthday, the princess decided to explore an old part of the palace. She found a door that she hadn't seen before, with a gold key in the lock. The princess turned the key, and slowly the door creaked open. Inside the room sat an old woman who was spinning wool. The old lady was really the mean fairy in disguise. The princess asked, "What are you doing?" And as she did so, she touched the spindle and pricked her finger. At once the princess fell into a deep sleep, and just as the fairy had wished, the king, queen, and everyone else in the palace fell asleep too. Over many years, a thorny hedge grew all round the palace. It grew so thick and high that soon no part of the palace could be seen. People forgot that it was there. Then one day, exactly 100 years later, a prince was riding by. He caught a glimpse of the palace and used an axe to chop his way through the thorny hedge. The palace was dusty and covered in cobwebs, and there were people sleeping everywhere. Even the pigeons on the roof had their heads tucked under their wings. The prince walked further until he came to the door with the golden key. He turned the key and found the princess sleeping inside. She looked so beautiful that the prince bent down and kissed her. At that moment the spell was broken, and the princess opened her eyes. The prince and princess fell in love at first sight. Then everyone in the palace woke up. The pigeons lifted their heads from under their wings. The horses shook themselves, and the dogs jumped up and barked. The prince and princess went in search of the king and queen to ask if they could get married. Of course, the king and queen agreed, and a week later the wedding took place. Everyone came to the wedding, including the fairies, but of course the bad fairy wasn't invited.